Holly L. Jones, author of Modern Cast Iron. And as you may know by now, I'm working on a book called Skilletheads, where we are investigating the world of collecting and restoring cast iron. And a big part of that is who makes the cast iron these days? What are these modern companies that have come out over the last few years? So today I have the immense privilege of talking with Peter Huntley of Stargazer Cast Iron. This may be a new company for you, but they have been around for a little while. And so I can't wait to dig into what makes Stargazer so unique. So thank you for coming, Peter. This is wonderful. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first, Stargazer. Where did the name come from?
Yeah, I started the company in 2015, and the name was, I wanted it to be personal, and I've always been a lover of science and astronomy, and we had some names that were, we threw around some names that were in that kind of vein, and I really liked the idea that the symbol of the brand, the logo, would directly tie to the name, and so we had that 8-pointed star that we stamp on the top of the handle, and that way people see the star and they know Stargazer, and it's recognizable and it's personal to me, and it also felt timeless. It wasn't like a hip name. It didn't sound old-fashioned. It sounded it could be anything, and I like that too.
I like that, timeless. I have a quote here that Stargazer is smooth, American-made cast iron cookware for performance, not nostalgia. We're moving cast iron forward. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background, which I know some of, but I definitely want our viewers to know more about your background personally. And then how did you come about creating a cast iron manufacturing company? It just intrigues me that anyone would take a step in that direction. So tell me how all this came about.
Yeah, so my background is in design. I went to school for art and design, and the things that I did after school always connected to design one way or another. I did graphics, and I did product development and product design and development. Before Stargazer, I worked in dinnerware doing ceramics and glass, so like, mugs and bowls and different ceramic and glassware. And I started to get a feel for the whole process of designing something on screen, working with manufacturers, coordinating with the factory, approving the samples, all this type of thing, and then ultimately taking it to market. Around that time, I started cooking with cast iron at home, because I didn't grow up cooking with it. I grew up, like a lot of people in my generation, cooking on Teflon and whatever else. Yeah. So I was introduced to cast iron. I started getting really excited about it. And at the time, there were only a couple. So this is maybe, let's say 2013, 2014 in there. There were only a couple on the market at that time. I mean, the sort of general conversation around it is that the good stuff is the vintage stuff, and they don't make them like they used to, and this and that. And I started getting into the vintage stuff. I started buying up the old pieces and getting into restoring them, and just really excited about the way they were made and the way that they performed with the smooth finish and everything. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I have this background in design, and it looks like there's an opportunity here. And I designed my own skillet, the sort of version 1 of the Stargazer skillet, and started talking to some foundries and some different people who have expertise, in these specific areas. And it looked like this is something that could be done, and it could be done in America, which was important to me to keep it American made. And so that was sort of part of the original goal, was American made and direct to consumer, and to do this modern design. I mean, the reason we say performance, not nostalgia, is I was excited about the vintage ones, and it was exciting to realize, oh, we can make them that way again. Mm-hmm. But I thought this is also an opportunity to, update a design that hasn't been touched in, 50, 60, 70 years, however long.
Right.
So I thought, we had some fresh ideas that could be brought into that, and I think we've been able to do that.
I think so. To give folks an idea of what Stargazer looks like, first of all, out of the box, it has a unique color. Would you call it a bronze? color.
Yeah, bronze or
Bronze.
copper or, sort of, yeah, dark brown.
Yeah, it's a very pretty, and I'm going to include some images in this video so
Sure.
folks can see exactly what we're talking about. It has that beautiful star in printed in it.
So the color is actually that dark bronze color, whatever we're calling it, is for our seasoned skillet. We also sell it bare. And if you get the bare one, you can see that it starts like any other metal. It starts gray. It's sort of a silvery gray color. And people are so used to seeing cast iron black that we just think that that's the color of the material. But that's actually the color of the coating and the heating. And it's the seasoning process that darkens it. It's
Right.
not the material itself.
Right.
So we have, that color comes from the specifics of our surface finish, but also the way that we season them in-house. And they will darken and, as they age and as they get used, they continue to darken from there.
Right. So you'll buy it out of the box with that pretty bronze goldish hue,
Right.
and then it'll get dark as you use it. And just so folks know, because every company's different, you guys season your seasoned cast iron with canola, grapeseed, and sunflower oil. And I
Yeah,
did
that's
like
right.
that you sold it unseasoned, because a lot of folks are kind of wary of what companies are seasoning with, or maybe there are other chemicals in there. And so they're
Sure.
getting them home and stripping them and then
Right.
re-seasoning. So that's really neat that you sell it bare.
Yeah, or they just have their own tried and true,
Mhm.
they have like, here's the way my grandma did it, and this is the right way. And we say, hey, if you've got your own method, how about it?
Right. Why not? So
Sure.
you also have, and this is part of that real modern design that you came up with. You have a helper handle, but instead of this little teeny tab, you have this nice wide helper handle that you can actually put an oven mitt through and hoist
Yeah.
that big pan up. So so that was really nice for folks like me, who I just don't have all that upper body strength. I need the helper handle,
Right.
and that seemed like a very nice safety feature
Yeah,
there.
thank you. Yeah, I've got one here actually. I mean, when we were so
There we go.
when we were designing it with the helper handle, I thought if you're going to have a handle, it should be a 4-finger handle, we called it. Like I should be able to get my entire 4 fingers through and get this secure grip on it. Some of them, like you said, they have that little tab, and I'm sort of hooking my finger under it and trying to balance on it. So yeah, it takes up a little more space on the stovetop this way, but it's, you can really feel like you have a secure grip on it and know that it's not going to slip off your finger.
Right. Well, hey, hold that pan up for us. Let's see the bottom of it. Show us the star. There we go. And you can see the name emblazoned on the bottom. So it's very obvious. This is a Stargazer cast iron. And then there's that pretty color.
Handle has the little star here.
Right. And now show us the handle, if you would. This is really nice
Oh,
to
yeah.
have one. Okay. So what's interesting about the handle for me is that it tapers up. So that looks like it's
Right.
very easy to hold. It's a good shape, and it's long.
Yeah, so it sort of curves up and away for a couple of reasons. One is just kind of the contour of your hand. It just felt a little more natural to me. But also to get the handle a little further away from the heat source.
Right.
Particularly on like a gas range where the flame is maybe coming around the edge. We have this fork here that's to dissipate the heat and keep the handle a little cooler. And then we're lifting it up in a way to get, just to get, again, keep it cooler and keep your hand away from the heat.
And that was one of the selling features I noticed on your website, was that the handle is more of a stay cool kind of handle, is that it takes longer to really get hot.
Yeah, and depending on the heat source, the size of your burner and what you're cooking and all these different variables, every handle is going to get hot at some point, but having this fork in there really helps dissipate the heat. And I've found that even after cooking for a long time, sometimes it's warm to the touch, but I'm not gonna burn myself on this. And that's it's also, it's a convenience thing. It's also a safety feature as far as I'm concerned, particularly people that maybe aren't used to cooking with cast iron. They go and grab the handle and you can do some damage.
Yeah, you'll lose your fingerprints that way.
Right.
And then also you do not have pour spouts, which are, pour spouts are very traditional, but you guys have replaced them with more of a lip around the entire edge.
Yeah, the flared rim. I can show that actually. If you look from the side here, you can see it sort of
Yeah,
curls out.
yeah.
Um,
So you
and
can
what that
pour
does
from
is
anywhere?
prevents, what's that?
You can pour from anywhere then?
Yeah, exactly. So that flare goes all the way around, and when you pour, it's not going to dribble down the side because it's, it's getting kind of caught on the lip there. Because I found the old ones, with the pour spouts, I know that that's the traditional look, and that's what we all expect to see from cast iron. But even after pouring, it was like dribbling down the side and making a mess. So yeah, the flared rim helps a lot with that.
Now, another thing I noticed that was interesting, every cast iron manufacturer has its own focus, what you think makes the perfect pan. And one of the things that you guys espoused was the optimal weight. And this is kind of a big thing in cast iron circles, because a lot of people want a thinner pan, but cast iron's thickness and its weight are what makes it work so well and keeps that heat retention and keeps it even and keeps you from getting those burn spots. So I read the article on your website. It was written really well, and it explained how too thin is too thin. And so you didn't want to just go thin. You wanted a pan that cooked very well, but then wasn't overly heavy. And so you came up with what you called an optimal weight. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And I thought this was interesting because this was speaks to your background in kitchen design. It might have been something that someone with a different background wouldn't have thought of or worded in such a way. So kind of walk us through that optimal weight a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. So both with the weight and with the surface finish, there's a real Goldilocks zone. There's a perfect, the way that those things are talked about is often inaccurate, in that people think smoother is better and they think lighter is better.
Yes.
And it's actually quite a bit more complicated than that in both cases. So as far as the weight is concerned, what we're really talking about is the material thickness, because everyone's casting the same material, right? It's all iron. So we're starting with the same density. So the big decision is about how thick to make this bottom piece, because that's most of your weight is across this bottom surface here. And I basically tested a bunch of skillets. I took every skillet we could find and checked for a number of different things. And there's durability concerns on both sides, and there's performance and use issues. So a thicker piece of material will be heavier and more difficult to move. It'll also retain the heat longer, but the thing that comes with that heat retention, what you're really talking about is the material's resistance to temperature change. So something that retains heat longer also takes longer to preheat. So that's sort of the double-edged sword of it. And if you go too thin, the other things that happen are, like I said, durability. It's more likely to warp or crack or whatever changes over time like that. And you're also going to get less even heating, because as the heat source comes up through the surface, it's getting dissipated through the material. So if you picture a very thin, wafer of material, it's going to be mirroring right what's under it. So whatever the heat source looks like, that's exactly how it's going to get heated on the other side, because you're not giving it room to dissipate.
Right.
So what that translates to in cooking is hot spots. You're going to get inevitably hotter in the center, cooler at the edges. So you're trying to weigh all these variables, right? Like people having it lightweight is a selling point, and people want to feel like they're in control of the pan on the stove, that it's maneuverable. But we know there's a certain amount of thickness that's necessary to get cast iron to retain the heat and cook the way that it's supposed to. For us, it's 1/8 of an inch. We machine it, so we cast it thicker and then we machine it down to 1/8 of an inch. And we decided that that was a really good, happy medium between having it maneuverable and durable and, all these considerations, that was the Goldilocks zone, so to speak.
All right. So there we go. So you're right. We've had a lot of blogs, and I read a lot of material that talks about no, smooth is better. No, the weight is better. The lighter weight's better. And you really do have to understand a little bit more about heat and metal
Sure.
and
it's,
all of these
you know,
things.
it's subjective too. Like for some people, they'd
Sure.
say, you know, they prefer a lighter pan and heat retention be damned. And for other
Right.
people, it's going to be all about heat retention. And so we're just trying to, for us, we're trying to balance those
Mhm.
all those factors and find something that we think is usable and also performs as expected.
Right. Now, when it comes to smooth versus textured, Stargazer is very much on the smooth side of things.
Right.
So, like you said, you machine your pan, and that's, I understand you're using like a CMC machine, if I said that correctly.
CNC, yeah,
CNC.
it stands for computer numerically controlled. It just means it's computer operated instead of manual.
Right. And so that's making sure that you're not eating away too much of the pan in this spot or that spot. It's making sure that
Right.
it's very consistent. So a
Mhm.
lot of people want everything done by hand, but in that regard, you'd want a machine involved
Oh,
to
yeah.
make sure you've got it very even.
Right. So we do all of the finishing work, all of the grinding. Uh, you know, we do a lot of handwork at the end,
Mhm.
but you want to have that machining process as precise as possible is really the bottom line. Because
Mhm.
even casting, and we can talk more about how these skillets are cast, but you know, they're cast in sand. I know you're familiar because I've seen your other book about the sand molds and about how those are made.
Mhm.
That's a fairly crude process in terms of, you know, now we have a lot of computer controls and a lot of precision, but it's still just the nature of the beast. When you're casting in sand, you're only going to get a certain amount of precision.
Mhm.
And as far as controlling the thickness of the material, like we talked about that perfect thickness and the perfect weight, we're really dialing that in machining, which is much more precise than what we can
Okay.
do on the casting side. So it's both a surface finish consideration with the machining and also dialing in that final thickness that everyone, you know, through this curve and up the sidewall, and we're really dialing in the thickness all throughout to get it exactly where we want it within a very tight tolerance.
Okay.
And then as far as surface finish, we're actually a little different. Usually when you're talking about machining, if you're looking at Stargazer and some of our more premium competitors in the market, you're looking at machined cast iron. You're looking at some kind of smooth, you know, as opposed to the
Mhm.
kind of $20 skillets that you see around. The big difference is the surface finish, right? The machining smooth. And our competitors and us, we all handle that process in very different ways. I'd say that's one of the big separators between Stargazer and some of the others is the way we handle that surface finish. Because like I said, you would think that smoother is better, so you want to machine it smooth and keep it as smooth and shiny as possible. And that's how we used to do it. We used to machine it smooth, and we would season it, and it was very shiny, and it looked really pretty. And people talk about, oh, it's as smooth as glass and it's polished, and you hear these terms, and we found that it doesn't hold seasoning very well. That you start cooking
Yes.
with it,
Yes.
and the surface is so slick that the seasoning lifts off with everything else that lifts off. Just because there's not enough tooth there. There's not enough texture for the coating or anything to hold on to. So
Yeah.
We've changed our surface finish probably 4 or 5 times at this point, where we keep kind of fine tuning. I mean, like little tweaks to how we handle it. For the last couple of years, we've been doing it the same way, in the way that we call micro textured, which is we're machining it, we're grinding it, and then we're reintroducing some texture with a proprietary process we have here to actually like raise the surface a little bit. And then we're doing our final tumbling surface finish. That's like the final smoothing. So we're actually, I hate to call it roughing it up, but we're reintroducing some texture at one of our middle steps so that that seasoning has something to grab onto at the end. Because otherwise it's just, you know, you start cooking and the seasoning just peels right off.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I was kind of chuckling when you said that, because I did a blog post on this topic, and I actually interviewed Lodge, or reached out to them, because they have the textured pan people think of, and and that's exactly what they said. They said, well, you need something for the seasoning to grab a hold of. And it was
Yeah.
funny how many people responded to that blog post vehemently arguing the case
Yeah.
that, that the smooth was better. But it is interesting. I think you're saying something that makes a lot of sense, that there are varying degrees, and so you need something for the seasoning to grab a hold of, although maybe people don't like the amount of texture Lodge has, and yours is a different kind of texture. So I think that's a really good middle ground stance to take, that
right.
It depends.
And that's what we call it micro textured, is it's really, it's about the size of the imperfection in the surface. So if you have something that's dead smooth, basically the size of the peaks and valleys. And if you have a skillet that's seasoned as cast, basically not machined or done anything after the fact, you're going to have peaks and valleys that are really too big for any kind of seasoning or coating to fill in. So you're going to be left with cooking on some of the peaks and valleys. And the goal, I think, is to have those peaks and valleys on a small enough scale that the seasoning itself is mostly filling them in. And you're starting with the seasoning has that to grab onto and is sort of leveling the surface.
Okay.
On a very, like a microscopic scale.
Yeah.
And you're starting with a more or less slick surface once that seasoning has taken hold. So you're really threading the needle of, you want just enough texture for the seasoning and then no texture after that, because you don't want to be cooking on a bumpy surface. You just want to have the seasoning, the good seasoning adhesion.
That's very
like I said, that's a trial and error thing that it took us a couple years to really dial that in. That was one of the most difficult parts of the process.
That's interesting. Now you said you talked a little bit about the vintage cast iron that you were studying. Did any of them come out as kind of for you, maybe kind of the epitome of what cast iron is, and you're like, let's make Stargazer kind of like that? Or did you just look at all of it and say, these are awesome, but let's do something different? How did that work in comparison to the vintage?
It's hard to say because of how much they all varied over time. Like looking at a Wagner from the 20s versus a Griswold from the 40s or whatever it is, that you can really see surface finish changing over time. And if you look at a particular brand in a particular era, a decade or so later, that same product, same brand, same product will be a little different. So I have my sort of favorite eras. Like for me, the 1930s Griswolds, which are like one of the earliest smooth bottom skillets, because the earlier ones all had the heat rings.
Yes.
And so this was Griswolds. I'm trying to see if I have one in here. And I don't. I have some 1940s on the wall here, not some 1930s. But those were really good. They were still really smooth. And but even then, it's hard for me to say that, like, yeah, they nailed it and we're trying to do that, because I found even in the 1930s Griswolds, which I think are some of the best skillets in history, the thicknesses are really all over the place. Like I have some, I mean, they vary by a pound or two. I mean, significant variations in weight and thickness. And some I found that are frankly too thin and get hot spots. So.
And is that because of their polishing process was more hand done?
Oh yeah.
That's why.
Yeah, they were almost definitely, I don't know exactly what tool was used at that time, but it would have been mostly manual grinding. And depending what operator was running the grinder that day and how much they were paying attention, maybe they took off a little more on one side than the other, or, one pan to the next, whatever. There were a million.
Kind of like a barber shop, a little here and a little there.
Sure. And they probably would have been mostly just kind of eyeballing it, and and you'd see variations because of that. But for us, it was about finding the best samples. Like this happens to be, for example, a Wagner from the 1920s, and we think that this thickness is right on. It's a good weight. It's a good. So then we can take all the measurements from that and say, okay, well, how thick was this one? And just kind of collect all those reference points, which for probably a good 6 months or so, that was my full-time job, was collecting skillets, taking all the measurements. I had these big spreadsheets of every measurement. Here's how long the handle was. Here's how, everything. And then you can pull together all that data of like, here are like the 5 best skillets that we found. Here's how thick they were. here's how flat the bottom was, here's whatever, and sort of build our design out of that. So it's hard for me to say that there's one gold standard, but I definitely found some great examples. And for me, in the 1920s and 30s, when you start to see the heat ring going away, but it's still early enough that the surface finish is really great. Because once you get into like the 50s, the surface finish is kind of, you know, it feels like they're starting to cut some corners at that point, and things are not as nicely finished as they were in the past.
Interesting. Now, speaking of which, on your website, when it talks about your personal background as kitchen designer, if I recall correctly, there was a little bit about that concept that American companies were starting to cut corners, and that kind of left you disillusioned for you to say, I can do this better. I
mean, a lot of it had to do with outsourcing. I mean, I had, I mean, there are many examples of this, but I happen to have, at my desk at work, I had a swing line stapler. It was a heavy duty, the model number is the 747 swing line stapler. It's just a classic, it's a classic stapler.
Okay,
And
was it red?
back in the day.
Was it a red stapler?
It wasn't red, it was black. But
okay.
You know, it's funny, I had one of my coworkers got me, he knew my stapler story, and he went and he got me a red stapler.
Oh,
this is
people
actually
who have watched the movie would know. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, my stapler. Yeah.
So anyway, I had this great heavy duty stapler at work, and it was, I thought, I love the stapler. I'm going to get the same stapler at home. I went and I ordered a Swingline 747 black stapler, and it showed up, and it was lighter. It was like half the weight of the other one, and it just felt kind of flimsy. And I started looking into it, and it turns out the one I had at work was made in New York. Swingline used to be based on Long Island, and the one I had at work was from the good old days. You know, and the new one was made in China or wherever. And it's not really, for me, it's not about, you know, it is special to have it American made, and we take, you know, pride in it because I'm American and I want us to make good things and this type of thing. But it's a lot about, as soon as something gets outsourced, inevitably corners are cut, costs are cut, and whoever decided that this stapler could be made with thinner gauge material, some other decisions were made. And you see that in so many products, that a brand, an American company, will establish itself and make this reputation making quality products. And then they kind of cut a couple corners, they make it in some other factory somewhere else, and it has the same brand on it, but it's not the same.
Yeah.
And I started just, you know, there's a period of a couple of years there, I started getting into cast iron. I started noticing more and more examples of that. And it was just bumming me out. And I thought, if we're going to put the Stargazer name on something, I want it to be made here in the United States. I want it done as much as possible under one roof and really have that quality control and that level of oversight, that that there's accountability, that if the Stargazer name is on it, it came from here, it has our stamp of approval, and for us to really stand behind that quality.
Now, when you say one roof, your products are, if I get this correct, it's cast in Wisconsin, machined in Ohio, hand smoothed, seasoned, and shipped in Pennsylvania. So you're hitting 3 different states with your cast iron.
Yeah, it's actually 4 at the end, all in, it's 4 different stops across 3 different states.
Wow.
And it is, the logistics of that. I mean, the reason, I think we had talked about the time frame being like 6 to 8 weeks for production, and that's most of the reason why, is coordinating, scheduling at these different plants and getting, transit times in between and getting everything scheduled in. So we're doing all the final inspection and all this surface finish work, and all the hand detail work is done here in-house, and we ship all the orders from here. All the seasoning and all that kind of thing is done here. But the foundry is doing, we partnered with a foundry that's in Wisconsin, and they're doing their part of it, which is very specialized. There's only a few foundries in America that can cast this type of thing in this particular way. and we're working with one of them. So we can't do that under one roof.
Right.
I would say that there's no like one building in America that does all these things, and that's just the nature of the beast. So we're sort of cobbling together different specializations, and anytime that there's not a place that specializes in that, we're filling in here. Like I said, all that surface finish treatment work, that's not really an established thing. We're getting set up for it in-house, and we're handling all that here.
Yeah. Now, it looks like you are always ready to make some changes to your products. You mentioned right before I pushed record that you have a 3D printer sitting right behind you.
Yeah, it's here. That's mostly for new development. We're always working on new products and working on the old ones too. I mean, I love the idea that the product continues to get better over time. I want to do the opposite of what some of those other companies do, when it's like you establish your reputation and then you can kind of lay back a little bit and you can sort of get away with more. I think if you buy a skillet today and you buy a skillet 5 years from now, that one 5 years from now should be a better product. We should always be improving the quality and not just coasting. Anyway, that's my goal, is it should always be better quality, more efficient, whatever it is, we should always be optimizing. But as far as the 3D printer, it lets us design and develop and get into production on a new item a lot faster, because I can have it in hand and we can see what does this feel like, what does this look like, and have all these questions answered very quickly. And yeah, it's been really helpful.
It's pretty cool. Not everybody has a 3D printer in their office. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And
so
you can see, I don't know if you can see this set here, but these are all, different lid shapes that we were trying. So we can bang them out pretty quickly and try this one on, try that one on. And
now there are a lot of people who are going to be very excited to hear that you are testing lids, because right now Stargazer has a 10.5 skillet and a 12-inch skillet, no lids. And I've read several comments, folks are dying for some lids. So is that where Stargazer's going next?
That's one of the places we're going next. Yeah, we're working on the lids. I'm working on the skillet in other sizes. When we have lids, there will be Dutch ovens. There will be other things that use the lid. So the lid is definitely, a crucial piece and the thing that I'm really focusing on right now. And I hope that'll be out, I don't know, in the next few months or something. That's
we won't hold you
definitely
to
priority list. Okay, thank you.
We won't hold you to it, but that's exciting to know that it's on the horizon. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that takes us from Stargazer A to Z. This is very fascinating to see how the different manufacturers focus on different things. And so this is a wonderful insight into Stargazer. Now, the big thing people are going to want to know is where to get Stargazer. And because you are a direct-to-consumer product, they need to go to stargazercastiron.com.
Yeah, you got it. Right. Okay. Right now in the United States, that's the only place to get it.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I will put all the links on this. I'll put pictures so folks can remember exactly what a Stargazer looks like. And hopefully folks will start checking you out in time for Christmas.
Thanks, appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate your time.
Yep, good to talk to you.